So I personally believe that easily one of the biggest points of contention online and a lot of backlash that was directed towards Nintendo in the launch of the Switch 2 generation did have to do with game key cards as a physical option for your games on this console, because clearly in the original Switch generation we only had two options at retail for picking up your games, and that was either an on cartridge experience, meaning the files of your game are entirely on that cartridge when you buy it at retail, and or a digital code in a box. And there was some hope when game key cards were announced that maybe they would just be replacing that digital code in a box situation where there's nothing in the actual retail box, but rather just a one-time use download code. And while the game key card, if you're unfamiliar, does allow you to resell your game, and it is still technically a physical copy because you get a cartridge, it is also only looking to download the files of that game from the server, meaning you need an internet connection, which shouldn't be a problem in most cases unless you're traveling, but you also need to fill up your internal storage to house that game. And obviously with a system that has 256 gigabytes of internal storage and games averaging 60 to 70 gigabytes from a third-party perspective in some cases, yeah, you can fill that up very quickly. And now a physical cartridge is not helping you offset any of that. And I think a lot of physical collectors are seeing that hit in their library. So clearly there's a lot of voices speaking up, wanting to see game key cards go away. Meanwhile, we see headlines that we will highlight here where third parties are actually praising Nintendo for offering the game key card. And we no doubt know that we are headed towards a more digital direction. But is there today a shred of hope that Nintendo is hearing some of this feedback and potentially even seeing it in the sales numbers, as we have also talked about some lower than minimum expectations reports when it comes to third-party games performance? Meanwhile, we had a game like Cyberpunk 2077 that was a full-on cartridge experience actually perform very well from a sales perspective. But I want to unpack the likelihood of if Nintendo is listening right now, because we do have some official surveys circulating in the Japanese market that are directly asking about game key cards and whether or not consumers are even interested in purchasing them. And while this is by no means confirmation that they're going away or anything like that, it does signal that Nintendo wants to kind of gauge the market reception that much more to the whole game key card situation. So we're going to unpack all of these details right after a quick word from today's video sponsor. Okay, if you want to truly take your home theater gaming setup on the go wherever you are at, you're going to want to pay attention, because listen, the Vitcher Pro Luma might be the craziest tech I've tried in a very long time, and I've checked out their competition. These are XR glasses, but not like the clunky stuff you've seen before. Lightweight, sharp, stylish, and they're the first glasses in the world that support the Switch 2. Full-on Switch 2 gameplay on a massive 152-inch virtual screen, no weird lag, no clunky setup, just plug in, sit back, and boom, you're gaming in a virtual theater. The Luma Pro is 50% sharper and 15% larger than their last model, with an ultra-premium translucent design and dynamic light effects that look super clean. It's also surprisingly customizable with things like adjustable temples, myopia tuning, electrochromatic film for sunlight. It's all just built in. And one thing that really makes these Vitcher glasses stand out from the competition is, of course, not only the fact that they work seamlessly with the Switch 2 and they're the first glasses to do so, but also their Vitcher Pro mobile dock is not only the gateway for you to be able to play this thing easily on the go with your Switch 2, but also the fact that it has a 13,000 milliamp battery in there, which clearly, with the battery life of the Switch 2, I think many of us are on the same page. It is a lot shorter than what you're used to with something like an OLED model. This can extend that seamlessly, and it's very nice to extend long gaming sessions. And when you're not gaming, these glasses can even transform 2D videos like your YouTube and old family clips into immersive 3D in real time. It's kind of like watching your content with brand new eyes, and definitely a cool feature. If you're serious about portable gaming and or entertainment, this isn't just a gimmick, it's the future, and it actually works. So please help support the brands that support me and click the link in the pinned comment and description down below to check out the Vitcher Luma Pro glasses today. You're going to want to see this for yourself. Big thank you to Vitcher for sponsoring today's video. Okay, so I want to first kick off this conversation right over at the Nerd Stash, where they do have a write-up with some translations of exactly what this survey is that Nintendo's sending out regarding the game key card situation. So you first have here, Switch 2 survey asks about game key cards. Is Nintendo responding to the backlash? And you have here, since the launch of the Nintendo Switch 2, one unexpected point of friction has been the introduction of the key cards. Many players found this brand new cartridge format for some of its games confusing, inconvenient, and straight up misleading, but at least there is a sign that suggests that Nintendo may be paying attention to this issue. screenshot circulating on the Japanese forum 5 channel revealed that Nintendo might be conducting a limited survey regarding keycards. According to the screenshots posted by an anonymous user, the questions cover the following. These are all translations, so they may not be word for word, but they have them bullet pointed here. So do you know that some Nintendo Switch 2 physical software comes in a cartridge called a keycard? Do you know about any keycard features? If a game you want to buy comes in both keycard and download versions, which would you prefer? When did you realize that the game you owned was a keycard? How do you feel about a game using keycard? And for me, it's that last question and also this question. Nintendo really trying to gauge, like, are you potentially not going to pick up a game physically because it is on a game keycard? And that's literally a couple of the direct questions around this. Also, how do you feel about the game being a keycard? Because as mentioned, there's definitely some downside to this. And I will say this as a lifelong physical collector, especially in the Switch generation. I bought just about everything I could physically. And I'm seeing the game keycard as, yes, there is an appeal for you having it in your collection still, and you can resell it, but I don't really intend to sell my games anymore. And so it is one of those things where, yes, at least you get something to go grab physically and have some box art to look at. But outside of that, 20 years in the future, if I want to go boot up my entire SNES library of games, my entire N64 or GameCube library of games, I have no problems doing that because all of the data is on the cartridge or disc. However, 20 years in the future with the Switch 2, there is no telling what the server status of the eShop or whatever that looks like will be at that time. And if Wii U, 3DS, and things like that are any indication, the services may be down, although to give them credit, Nintendo, they will let you re-download from those servers games that you have already purchased and things like that. But nonetheless, at a certain point in the future, you will get cut off from the access of those game keycards, and they could be rendered useless from a long-term perspective. So it's very obvious that there is a big downside to those, not to mention the fact that they are filling up your internal storage of 256 gigabytes for the Switch 2, and a lot of games this generation are very large in size, 50, 60, 70 gigabytes already, games we're seeing in this generation in some cases. And if you have some of the Switch 1 library that you brought over, chances are you could really be filling up your storage very quickly. And we have seen headlines like this making the rounds in the past. Middle of June is when this one was published. Third-party Switch 2 game sales have started off slow, with one publisher selling below our lowest estimates. Cyberpunk 2077 has enjoyed some success on Switch 2, however. So it's really kind of the interesting question to unpack here is this any kind of symptom of the fact that a lot of consumers are informed and they're choosing not to pick up game key cards right now? Or is this something that the general consumer really doesn't know the difference between an on-cartridge experience versus a game key card? And come holiday season, we're really going to see them walk to the register and make the same purchase choice regardless. Well, my theory around this is you might have a more informed consumer at the launch of the console because that is Nintendo's big core base. So I do actually think that there's some level of correlation between lower third-party game sales than expected and also the game key card situation. I think a lot of the people that go out there and buy a day one console and try to track it down when it's constantly out of stock are people that watch channels like this and also stay up to date with the general Nintendo news cycle, and they read the details of things like what the game key card is. However, when you talk about the masses and mom and dad are shopping for their kids, family, and loved ones at Christmas time, are they actually going to go and read the front and back of the label and really understand that there is an internet download required for the cartridge to be functional at all? And does that even raise a red flag to them? And that's kind of where the broader question lies. But Nintendo was actually interestingly asked about this question directly from investors at their most recent gathering of the shareholders, where one investor even framed it kind of referencing that lower sales story as a question to President Furukawa, and he had this to say. So the question is, the Nintendo Switch 2 uses a game card called a key card, but there are some opinions online that specifications are somewhere between packaged software and downloadable software, and that packaged software without data is not very appealing. If software publishers that use the key card don't sell as well as they would like because of this specification. There is a concern that software publishers will move away from the Nintendo Switch 2. What are your thoughts on this? So this is Furukawa directly being asked with the question, is sales going to taper off, or third parties not going to be happy because of the sales performance because of the key card? And Furukawa had this to say: the key card used in Nintendo Switch 2 does not contain the game data, but instead stores a key to launch the software. The first time you play, you need to connect to the internet and download the data to play the software. From the second time onwards, you can play even without an internet connection. You need to insert the key card into the console. This is one of the new software sales methods we have added, as the data capacity of game software for Nintendo Switch 2 will be larger than that of Nintendo Switch. There are various sales methods for software, so we would like to discuss various points with software publishers and strive to have them actively support our platform. So very non-direct PR statement. Here's what a key card is, and we're going to work with the publishers at the end of the day. The question becomes, will publishers be happy with sales performance of their key card releases, or would they maybe work with Nintendo to get the cost down for something like a 64 gigabyte cartridge? Mind you, 64 gigabytes is not necessarily going to be big enough for all the games this generation. There are rumors of Call of Duty, well, not even rumors, we know we're going to get the next Call of Duty at some point in time on the Switch 2. That's a signed contract. What is that file size going to look like? It will probably be a key card. But if sales drop down dramatically, would additional file storage sizes be added into the manufacturing option? Would Nintendo also potentially put out smaller cartridge sizes for more simple games? Because there is a belief that so many people, or publishers rather, are opting for the keycard option just because of the cost around them, because a 64 gigabyte cartridge, which seems to be the only size that Nintendo has manufactured in this console generation, tend to run upwards of $16. And that is a rumor on the price point for that, but I do find it to be largely believable, at least in that general price frame. And then you have to stop and think that for a $60 game, when you're taking 16 off the top just to throw it on a cartridge, maybe it's not quite as bad on 60, but you talk about a 50 or 40 game, you're really severely cutting into any profit margin you have, and you almost don't want to sell a physical copy as opposed to a digital copy if you're a publisher in that case. And then we do have prior headlines as well, where people are reporting that publishers are thanking Nintendo for game key cards on Switch 2, according to a Japanese consultancy firm. Now, this is a lot of like, they could have talked to a handful of publishers that feel that way and other ones that don't. But the long and short of it is, consumers will ultimately dictate if Nintendo does look into this further and look at pulling back the game key card as an option based off the sales performance of their games. Because if we're seeing a ton of game key cards and we're seeing way less overall game sales from a third party perspective, because we know Nintendo's not using the game key card themselves, they've actually legitimately confirmed that from a first party standpoint, and they really don't need to for most games. It's like 20 gigs, 8.8 gigs for Donkey Kong Bonanza, but like 20 gigs for Mario Kart World. They're well underneath that 64 gigabytes. They'll probably remain underneath for the generation. So they're committed to not putting their games on key cards. But what about all the third parties is the big question. And we have seen some talk that we've covered here on the channel from other smaller publishers kind of making a rally call for, software developers to hit them up and to basically work with them to try to get the cost down, or some kind of workable arrangement to put the full game on the cartridge, because that's what consumers want. And so I just wonder if there is starting to become enough of a movement and enough of lack of sales of the key card options compared to, when you look at the small sample size of a game like Cyberpunk 2077 that does seem to be performing very well at the Switch 2's launch, and that is on cartridge experience entirely, versus another game that you might think would perform well, but it's just not on the key card. At what point does Nintendo start to say we really have to investigate this and get to the bottom of if a key card is stopping a consumer from potentially buying a game at the end of the day? And then just to kind of drive home the point that I do think that while this might be a win potentially in the short term, I don't necessarily think in the long term things are going in the right direction for physical collectors like myself. You may remember an interview with Doug Bowser where he said Nintendo on physical games, because they're still a key part of our business. But I want to read his exact comment, because I think a lot of people skimmed over this when it came out, and it literally starts off with his quote is, "In the immediate future, physical games are still a key part of our business. And we value our relationships in particular with retailers, and we wanted to make sure we have products available for them to sell to their consumers. When you look at the game key card for us, our goal with the Switch 2 is similar to what we were able to accomplish with the Nintendo Switch, is to have the broadest and deepest library of content we possibly can, and that includes publishing partners, and game key cards are a way that our publishing partners are able to bring more content onto the platform, deeper, larger, and more immersive content on the platform. But the big key word there, and for me, is just that right at the top. In the immediate future, physical games are still a key part of our business. So I do believe Nintendo sees the trends, they know what's going on, but it's interesting that this survey is circulating in the Japanese market, because that is largely still a physical market for Nintendo. And it's very important for Japanese gamers potentially to feel like they want to have their games on the cartridge entirely. And I just wonder if this is the start of Nintendo looking at this a second time, offering some lower storage capacities for the Switch cartridges to work with publishers to maybe not always have to opt for that key card option for cost reasons and things like that. So I am hopeful we see this shift to a little bit more of a happy medium, and maybe only one-off third-party games go key card route. I'm personally not picking up key cards. I'm just literally buying those games digitally for the convenience as part of my digital library. And it's one of those unfortunate things that my physical game collection in the Switch 2 generation is basically going to consist of first-party Nintendo and a select handful of third-party games, unless if this trend changes over time. But let me know your 2 cents on all of this in the comments down below. Lots of dialogue around the game key card, and now maybe a little bit of hope out there for Nintendo starting to listen to some of this feedback. But do you think they are actually listening, or do you think this is going to be one of those things that makes the headlines for a little while, but ultimately we will still see a game key card? Do you think there's a shot that Nintendo does remove the game key card, but then we're really just stuck with, you know, a physical on cartridge option or a download code in a box? And if you had to guess, do you think we have another full generation of physical games, or are we in the last generation of physical games as we stand right now? So make sure you share all your thoughts and feelings in the comments down below before you leave, regardless if we agree or disagree. Also, make sure you like, subscribe, turn your notification bell. And with that, I've been Sunbro, you've been Nation. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.